If you don't want to stick around at the end of this video, I'm going to tell you that I believe the US and China will likely reach a new equilibrium with tariffs settling anywhere between 25 and 40%. High enough to start reshaping global supply chains, but not so high as to collapse trade entirely. However, you'll miss understanding why this is happening, how game theory predicts it, and what it means for your wallet. And for those of you who are interested in seeing what's going to happen beyond the Nash Equilibrium, I've left a marker in the timestamps called Advanced Games. I think you will find it interesting, but let's get back to that coffee you'll be drinking tomorrow morning. It just got more expensive. That phone in your pocket, price hike coming. That wallet, about to get a lot lighter. And I'm going to show you how this trade war is actually following a predictable pattern that game theorists have understood for decades. Let's do a quick recap. In February and March 2025, Trump started putting tariffs on Chinese goods, primarily citing concerns about fentanyl. China responded with more or less similar tariffs. By April 8th of 2025, US hit tariffs of 104%. And on April 9th, Trump pushed them to 145%. And on April 11th, China struck back with 125% tariffs. Each step up in this ladder makes everyday products more expensive for both American and Chinese citizens. And here's something that should hopefully shock you. During the last trade war, American companies lost $1.7 trillion in market value, yet most politicians claimed that it was a success. This disconnect is exactly what game theorists predict when something called as information asymmetry exists between parties. Take a moment right now and look around your room. How many items do you see that were made in China? I guarantee you, lots, because that's the same with me. If this continues, each of these items will cost more in the coming months. But the million-dollar question on everyone's mind is this. Is this just posturing, or are we watching the collapse of the world's most important trading relationship in real time? To answer that, we need to understand the hidden rules of the game. Enter game theory. Game theory, as cool as it sounds, isn't just what economists and mathematicians talk about. It's something you subconsciously or even consciously use every day, perhaps without even realizing it. Imagine these two butter tarts represent the US and China. Each country has two choices: cooperate with low tariffs or defect with high tariffs. If both cooperate, both economies win $3 trillion in annual trade. If one defects while the other cooperates, the defector gains a short-term advantage of $500 billion in trade protection. But if both defect, both lose with collapsed trade and higher prices for consumers. This is the famous prisoner's dilemma, and what makes it really interesting is that rational self-interest often leads to irrational collective outcomes. Even though both sides would be better off with cooperating, the fear of being exploited pushes them towards mutual destruction. When economists at the University of Chicago studied the 2018-19 trade war, they found that the US importers paid nearly 100% of tariff costs, not Chinese exporters. Meanwhile, Federal Reserve economists found that those tariffs reduced US manufacturing employment by 1.4% and raised producer prices by 4.1%. History suggests that these new, much higher tariffs will have even more dramatic consequences. What Trump is somehow in denial about is that these tariffs are essentially a hidden tax on American consumers. When politicians say China will pay, game theory shows us why it's mathematically impossible for that to happen. Thankfully, first buddy Elon Musk gets it, and I think he's certainly behind much of the reversal of tariffs on the world after the April 2nd Liberation Day announcements. The math, as you already have seen, is quite questionable. Let's dive a little deeper now. In game theory jargon, what the US and China are playing are called repeated games because the number of moves available to either party are theoretically not limited. The most successful strategy in repeated games like this is called Tit-for-Tat. You start cooperative, then simply mirror whatever your opponent did last time. China has been playing textbook Tit-for-Tat. The US raises tariffs, China responds with matching tariffs. So far, so good. But Trump just broke that pattern by jumping from 104% to 145% without giving China an opportunity to respond. Game theory tells us that this is a risky move that can lead to one of three different outcomes. 1. Submission. China backs down and accepts unfavorable terms. However, considering China's current place in the world stage and Xi Jinping's pride, this will probably not happen. 2. Escalation spiral. China responds with even higher tariffs, leading to economic mutual destruction. 3. Calibrated response. China responds proportionately but signals willingness to negotiate, which is exactly what they did with the 125% tariff. High enough to show resolve but still below America's 145%. Like a chess knight that moves in unexpected L patterns, trade negotiations rarely follow a straight line. Actually, China's response tells us they're still playing by the game theory rules, and that gives us clues about what can potentially happen next. Trade wars are very much like an economic game of chicken. Two cards racing towards each other, and the first one to swerve loses face, but both crash if nobody yields. So where do we go from here? In game theory, there's a concept called Nash Equilibrium, named after mathematician John Nash. Exactly, the beautiful mind guy. It's a situation where neither player can benefit by changing their strategy while the other player keeps theirs the same. Right now, the US-China trade relationship is wildly out of equilibrium. These extreme tariffs are unsustainable because they hurt both economies. The laws of economic gravity will eventually pull us towards a new equilibrium. Unfortunately, the new equilibrium won't be the same as the old one. We're witnessing what game theorists call the regime change in the relationship. Let's quickly recap the high-level numbers. During Trump's first term, tariffs settled at around 20%. Now they've exploded to over 100%. Even when they come back down, they likely won't return to pre-2025 levels. Take a moment and think about your own financial situation. If the products you buy regularly suddenly cost 20% more, how would that change and affect your budget? Unfortunately, what we're really watching is the painful negotiation of a new normal between the world's two largest economies. As Chinese President Xi Jinping stated just recently, China is self-sufficient and is not afraid of any unjust suppression. By the way, this is classic signaling in game theory, communicating resolve to strengthen your negotiating position. I want to pivot for a moment to address the more advanced games I mentioned earlier. If this feels too much for you, just jump to the next section and you won't lose a lot. Our first stop is to see what's going on beyond the simple Nash equilibria. The current tariff war can better be understood through the lens of sub-game perfect equilibrium rather than just a static Nash equilibrium. This can be modeled as an extensive form game where the US moves first by imposing initial tariffs. China responds with retaliatory tariffs. The US then decides whether to escalate, maintain, or withdraw. By using backwards induction, we can see that China's optimal strategy is conditional cooperation, again, better known as tit-for-tat, rather than pure defection. This explains why China chose a 125% tariff in response to the US 145% tariff. It signals willingness to punish defection while leaving room for de-escalation. The tariff war also exhibits classic elements of a signaling game with incomplete information. Trump's decision to pause tariffs on 75 countries while escalating them to 125% on China serves as a separating equilibrium strategy that signals resolve to China by showing willingness to bear economic costs, creates information asymmetry about true preferences. Is this goal economic or political? And it establishes credible threats for future negotiations. This aligns with what game theorists call strategic ambiguity, maintaining uncertainty about one's true payoff function to gain negotiating leverage. The current situation is perhaps best modeled as a finitely repeated game with reputation effects. Research in game theory shows that even with known endpoints, cooperation can emerge if players care about their reputation in other concurrent games. There is uncertainty about other players' type, cooperative or aggressive. China's measured response suggests that they're playing a grim trigger strategy, willing to cooperate but ready to punish defection indefinitely. This explains why they haven't massively expanded their unreliable entity list to include more American companies. They're most likely maintaining flexibility for future cooperation. Then there's the lens of multi-level games and domestic politics, best described by Robert Putnam's theory of two-level games. It provides insight into why both sides may maintain seemingly irrational positions. Both presidents, Trump and Xi, are simultaneously playing an international game with other countries and a domestic political game with their constituents and citizens. Trump's aggressive tariff stance serves his domestic political interests really well, even if it creates economic inefficiency internationally. Similarly, China cannot appear weak to its own domestic audience, explaining why they must respond to tariffs even when it harms their own people. Two final points here before we return to the basics. Thomas Schelling's concept of focal points helps explain why tariffs tend to cluster around certain levels. In fact, a Schelling point describes an intuitive focal solution people gravitate towards without even direct communication. The current 125% versus 145% levels aren't necessarily arbitrary, rather strategic focal points that do a few things. Send clear signals about intentions, create neutral thresholds for negotiations, and establish reference points for eventual compromise. So game theory predicts that eventual settlement will likely occur at a focal point between these two extremes, perhaps 25 to 40%. The current impasse reflects what game theorists call a commitment problem. Both sides would benefit from mutual tariff reduction, but neither can credibly commit to maintaining that position due to political incentives to appear tough, inability to bind future administrations to agreements, and domestic constituents that benefit from protection. This explains why, despite the Nash Equilibrium clearly indicating mutual harm from high tariffs, countries remain stuck in suboptimal equilibria. So what does the endgame look like? Based on game theory principles and historical patterns, I see three possible scenarios unfolding. Scenario 1, the negotiated settlement. Within 60 to 90 days, economic pain forces both sides to the negotiating table. China offers concessions on intellectual property and market access. The US reduces tariffs to around 25 to 40%. Both sides claim victory. This is the soft landing scenario. The trading relationship stays whole, though perhaps slightly rebalanced. Scenario 2, the cold economic war. Tariffs remain high for 6+ months. Supply chains permanently redirect. Chinese investments in the US collapse. American companies accelerate exits from China. We see the formation of two competing economic blocs, one US-led, one China-led. This is the partial decoupling scenario. The relationship is fundamentally damaged and cannot be put back together the same way. China has already demonstrated interest in developing a multipolar world through its now stuttering Belt and Road Initiative as well as the BRICS set of nations. This is almost a perfect opportunity for it to make another push in that direction, and maybe they will see accelerated success this time around. Scenario 3. The new equilibrium. After a period of high tariffs, a new trading relationship emerges with more restricted trade in strategic sectors like technology, but continued trade in non-sensitive areas. You've already seen Trump remove tariffs on phones and computer equipment. Tariffs settle at, again, 25 to 40%, higher than before but lower than current levels. This is the managed trade scenario. Like this glass, you can see it as half empty or half full, depending on your perspective. I'm curious, drop a comment below to tell me what you think will happen next. Will we see a negotiated settlement or continued escalation? Based on game theory principles and the signals we're seeing from both sides, I think scenario 3 is most likely. Here's why. Complete economic separation between the US and China is nearly impossible given how deeply intertwined the two economies are. But returning to pre-2025 relationship is equally unlikely. This phone contains dozens of components from so many countries. Completely severing these supply chains would make technology unaffordable for the average consumer. At the same time, continuing to depend on each other for critical technologies creates vulnerabilities that neither side can accept or want. The most rational outcome is a hybrid approach, therefore, what economists call strategic decoupling. Critical industries like semiconductors, AI, and biotech will separate into competing ecosystems. Non-strategic goods will continue flowing, but with potentially higher tariffs than before. I just need to say this one thing again. When Trump talks about tariffs, he's really describing a tax that Americans pay, not China, not Canada, not India, not Europe. It's kind of punching yourself in the face to give your opponent a nosebleed. I do believe some form of de-escalation is possible. Trump called Xi a smart man. China's spokesperson reiterated recently that Beijing remains willing to engage in negotiations with the US on equal terms. This is a classic de-escalation signal in game theory, offering a path back from the brink while maintaining your position. The issue is that Trump wants Xi to call him, but Xi knows very well that the unpredictability of the White House could very well mean a repeat of the Zelensky moment. China will never let that happen, so something or someone's gotta give. Game theory predicts that after this initial punishment phase, both sides will gradually reduce tariffs to find a sweet spot or a focal point that protects strategic interests while minimizing economic damage. Like I mentioned before, the new equilibrium will likely involve US tariffs of around 25 to 40% and Chinese tariffs at similar levels. High enough to reshape supply chains, but not so high as to collapse trade entirely. And we're already seeing this. China has notably chosen not to announce additional export controls or expand its unreliable entity list to include more American companies, suggesting that they're leaving room for negotiation. As Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman put it, trade wars aren't good and they aren't easy to win. Now you may have come this far and may say to yourself, boo, I already knew all of this. Game theory, just like any other model, is a lens that helps us understand the world around us. And from that perspective, it is a powerful tool to cut through the political rhetoric and understand the strategic logic driving both sides. And it tells us something important. Despite the alarming headlines, rational self-interest will eventually prevail over destructive escalation. Finally, in game theory, the best outcome often comes not from maximizing your own gain, but from finding a balance where both sides can claim victory while avoiding mutual destruction. And that's not just good game theory, it's actually good foreign policy. If you found this useful, like this video, hit that subscribe button, share it with someone who will find it interesting or intellectually stimulating as well. Let me know how you are thinking about Trump's tariffs. I'll see you on the next one and have a great day.